Greg Palast is the best-selling author of Armed Madhouse. He's also an investigative journalist for the BBC. Among others, his website is gregpalast.com. Greg, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Hey, Max. Glad to be with you.
Greg, you are a former corporate fraud and racketeering investigator. The question I have, is there a RICO case to be made against the Wall Street banks, regulators, politicians, rating agencies, fund managers, etc.? Isn't this an example of racketeering, and shouldn't we go after them using RICO?
Absolutely. I was one of the first guys to apply RICO, the anti-racketeering laws, to corporate crime, big corporations, and absolutely, what you see among the banks is a conspiracy, and I don't say that in the nutcase form, but just these guys do get together and coordinate how they can suck money out of your pocket, and then obviously a tremendous amount of damage to the economy. And it's perfect racketeering case. But who's going to bring it, Max?
Okay, so in other words,
they're going to bust themselves. Is the is the administration going to read its rights to itself, or how do we do that?
Right. So it's not a conspiracy theory. This is actually a conspiracy, and the conspiracy involves participants like the rating agencies, Moody's and S&P. It involves the investment banks. It involves the fund managers who are trading on this information, and all of these component parts. I see very frustrating. I watch congressional testimony. And first they introduce the CEOs of the, what I call the financial terrorists on Wall Street. Then they interview the rating agencies and ask what went wrong. Then they interview some famous fund manager like John Paulson and ask him what went wrong. Well, how come they don't connect the dots and say that they're all corrupt? It's a massive conspiracy. It's racketeering is what it is. And they need to address it as such. Isn't there a mechanism within the U.S. government that could apply this racketeering law? You're saying it doesn't exist. There is nobody. They're all corrupt. There is nobody left. There's no untouchables left.
Well, we have a Securities Exchange Commission which was completely asleep at the switch. They couldn't even get a guy like Madoff who was fiddling $50 billion. This stuff is more sophisticated. They looked at Anthony Mazzillo, who's the only guy that they seem to have tagged at all, who ran the countrywide subprime mortgage gangster operation, which became part of Bank of America. But,
right.
It was really a unit of Bank of America effectively. And so why is Bank of America off the hook? When you have a conspiracy, it's usually with someone. Why is the co-conspirator not in the dock there?
Right.
We also have the rating agencies, as you said, which were paid by the banks to basically whitewash their balance sheets. You're looking at a guy. I guess this might take me down a few pegs in your estimation, but would you like to buy some of my Lehman bonds, Max? It was, by the way, it was AA+ rated. So yeah, I think I have a bone to pick with these guys, and it's not just bad judgment.
Wait a minute. You got sucked into this? You own some of these Lehman paper?
Well, because I got to tell you that Citibank, unfortunately, where I stupidly had my money instead of a community credit union, shame on me. They wouldn't let me trade in oil when oil was too high. I wanted to take it. I wanted to bid against oil. They said, no, that's too dangerous. You need to put it in someplace safe. So they parked it for me temporarily in Lehman Brothers, and the rest is wallpaper.
All right, let's move on. You've also reported extensively on vulture funds. These funds are now starting to target Western nations. We know they've been active outside of the West. We see that with Greece, for example. Can you explain to the audience what a vulture fund does, what it will mean to have economic carcasses torn apart by one of these funds in Greece, Iceland, and the rest of these countries, including the U.S.?
Yeah, well, these are funds. These are operators who take advantage of economic chaos, mayhem. In fact, I just came back from Liberia, where I had done a report hunting down American vultures who had seized the debt of Liberia, some of it for nothing, some of it for 1 penny on the dollar, sued Liberia in the middle of a civil war when they had no government to respond, won tens of millions of dollars in default judgments, and now are basically sucking up the aid money meant for Liberia. Now, that's how they treat the third world. We're used to that. But I got to tell you, they are turning it now on the U.S., they're turning it on Greece, they're turning it on other countries where basically financiers make money on the demise of economies instead of on the growth of economies. They're not investing in anything. What they're doing is they're seizing financial assets, and they are doing their level best to make sure that the countries collapse. They can then pick up the paper, they can pick up the bonds, the debts for next to nothing, and then they find ways. We found ways through bribery, through intimidation, blackmail, and hiring Henry Kissinger, which wraps it all up, hiring Henry Kissinger to then use political muscle to get paid out of the poorest nation's accounts, or in some cases they'll take seize aid money. You know, in the case of Greece, you've got a bunch of financiers who say, pay up at a tremendous price, or we take the economy down. You have to understand, these countries are paying you serious rates to borrow to stay alive. Well, you can't, it's just like Argentina, which is being forced to pay 16%. Well, if you pay 16% on your debts, you cannot possibly stay in business as a nation. And now they're playing the game with Greece. They're putting pressure on Greece. And that's just one example. But, you know, they do it within nations, too, whether it's on the auto parts industry in the United States, etc. You'll see vultures acting everywhere. One
right.
vulture, I've been dealing with Elliott Associates investigating for the BBC, made its money in the asbestos area by figuring out how to buy up asbestos companies, then getting the law changed so that these asbestos companies wouldn't have to pay the victims of asbestos, of lung cancer caused by asbestos, and therefore the company suddenly became very valuable. So these are people who made money off of not paying sick, dying people. This is a vulture. The difference is that at least, but you know, the difference between a vulture with feathers, a bird, and these vultures is that vultures with feathers at least wait for things to die. These guys are killers.